Hi there, Mandy Friedman here, licensed professional clinical counselor, clinically certified domestic violence counselor, clinically certified trauma professional, level 2, the creator of SNAP, survivors of narcissistic and abusive personalities. I am back with Michelle Manette and Melanie Mize, my good friends, and we're talking about the cost of fairness as it relates to family court, custody issues, parenting schedules, and today we're going to talk about child support. It's a hot topic and we have a lot to say, but first, Michelle, would you introduce yourself to our audience and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, hi, I'm Michelle Manette and I run 2 businesses. One is F All That coaching practice where I help people heal from narcissistic abuse and toxic relationships. And then with Melanie, we run family court empowerment coaching where we try to provide support for people leaving high conflict situations, relationships with a high conflict other, and then also consult with attorneys to provide support and consultation through that process.
And Melanie, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
I am a licensed Ohio attorney with extensive experience in family law and in child custody matters specifically. I also hold an advanced degree in behavior analysis. I presently work as a guardian ad litem, a mediator, and then along with Michelle as a co-parenting coach and litigation support.
And let me just say that they do an excellent job with their clients who are going through those high conflict issues with family court. I personally have referred people to Michelle and Melanie, and we need more of this. People need help. They need help navigating their situation, and they need someone that can talk to them in ways that they understand. Professionals who are trauma informed are so hard to come by, and Michelle and Melanie are trauma informed. They understand abusive relationships. They understand what it takes to recover from an abusive relationship. So if that's something that applies to you and you're in this kind of a situation, check out the notes to this episode and you'll see the contact information for family court empowerment coaching. One of the questions that people have about child support is, how is it figured? How do we know how much someone is going to pay? And how does the fairness aspect enter in? You know, is it fair? Is it unfair? When we decide, when it's decided the amounts, how's it calculated? And then is fairness a factor at all? Melanie, maybe you can answer this question for us.
The support is calculated using some formulas, magic formulas that the state has come up with that I cannot explain to you in detail. But essentially what they're looking at is the child rearing expenses, like just the cost of having children as a percentage of the total family expenditures. And they look at how much each parent is bringing in by either wages or disability or social security income, bonuses, overtime, things like that, any type of money coming into the household. So they factor all that in. And also looking at, as far as fairness goes, you know, they look at what the costs are for childcare throughout the year or health insurance throughout the year, and credit whichever parent may be paying that, credit that to them so they kind of have an adjustment to their income. So looking at how to come up with a number that's going to keep some stability between the households so that there's not a rich house, poor house situation for the kids. On top of child support, there in Ohio, at least, there's also this thing called cash medical support. And that's like an extra amount that gets put onto that child support order. That represents what is considered to be the average out-of-pocket healthcare expenses for a child annually. And so they also divide that up between the parents, generally by income share. And right now, the number that they use is that they guess that the average amount spent on out-of-pocket medical for a child in a year is $510.21. So
that's it.
So, yeah. So in child support orders, there are those two items. One is child support, and 2 is the cash medical support.
Is that new? I'd never heard of that before.
No, it's been around for a long time. They did update the amount in the past year or 2. It used to be $388.70 for a long time. And they just updated that to the 510 number.
How does parenting time factor in when it comes to child support?
There are ways that child support may be, so that you come up with this basic number for what the support is going to be, just using this calculator that the state puts out. And then there are ways to argue for a deviation of that support, and that may be either an upward deviation, so paying more child support than what otherwise might be ordered, or a downward deviation, so paying less. The amount of parenting time can factor in for that decrease in child support. The basic child support number that comes out assumes the standard schedule, which has, essentially a parent that has the kids primarily, and the other parent has every other weekend and maybe one day during the week, something like that. So once, in Ohio at least, once a parent gets to having 90 or more overnights per year with the child, then they get an automatic 10% downward deviation on child support. So if the child support order were $100 a month, if the parent has 90 or more overnights in a year, they will now have a $90 child support order. They get that 10% deviation downward. The next deviation that relates to parenting time is if a parent is going to have 147 or more overnights per year. And this is not based on how much they actually have. This is based on what their court order says. So if the court order gives them 147 or more overnights, so this is going more toward parents who have like a 60-40 split on time or 50-50 split, something like that. Then there's another option for a downward deviation. And there is no specific number that's related to that. It's more a set of factors that the court might look at to determine how much they might deviate down. And that could be any number of things. It's basically a fact dependent with regard to the situation at hand. So sometimes we see cases where, just easiest example is that the parents both make similar amounts and they have a parenting time schedule where the kids are spending equal time with each parent. Then you might see a child support number that is totally zeroed out, because the available resources in each home are very similar.
And I got a couple more questions for you, Melanie. One being that, there are people that don't want to pay their child support. What happens when someone isn't paying their child support?
There are two options with that. Sometimes the Child Support Enforcement Agency takes up that issue because they're monitoring what comes in, what goes out, what the order is. And so they may decide to file a motion with the court, a motion to show cause. And what they're asking is for the court to tell the child support obligor, which is the person who's supposed to pay, tell them they need to come to court and they need to show cause why they are not paying this and why they shouldn't be held in contempt for not paying it. So the Child Support Enforcement Agency can take that up independently. Another option is that the other parent may file such a motion with the court asking for that same type of relief.
May I also add, I used to go into prisons to do psych evaluations for people that were leaving soon. And I saw quite a few. I mean, it's a felony if you don't pay. I'm not sure at what point, maybe you can answer that. Melanie, I don't know. But at some point it's a felony and people get prison time and serve prison time for not paying child support.
I do not know the ins and outs of that off the top of my head, but I do know that there are basically kind of tiers of how the court is going to treat this, because their goal is to get that child support paid.
Right.
So your very first offense on something, let's say you're 3 or 4 payments behind, the very first offense is not going to be, we're going to send you to prison. I think when people wind up in prison settings for this, it's probably that they're owing tens of thousands of dollars, something pretty large, generally speaking. They're going to start with something like, hey, we're going to find you in contempt and you may have some level of incarceration, like 30 days or something in the county, but you can purge that contempt by paying this amount on the child support by the state. So they usually try to give some sort of potential punishment, and they kind of put it on a shelf and they say, hey, we're going to take that off though if you can do this level of compliance within a short period of time. They typically start with things like that. Or we used to see a lot of driver's license suspensions that arise from not paying child support. There could be different fines levied, things like that. So they kind of increase in nature as you go along. And this is not a perfect system by any means. So a lot of people just kind of get away with not paying their child support, unfortunately.
Well, and it's interesting too, not having your driver's license or being incarcerated does interfere with one's ability to earn the money that they owe. It's kind of like back to that whole like debtor's prison or debtor's jail or.
Yeah, it does. So let's say you get your driver's license suspended for failure to pay child support. Let's say you're a delivery driver. You might petition the court to say, hey, can we lift that suspension because I actually need my driver's license to be able to perform my job, and that is the way I would pay my support. And so, the court, generally, they will lift it. It's not like they're trying to keep people from paying their support. They're trying to encourage people to pay it.
How much does it cost to petition the court?
If CSEA does it, it doesn't cost you anything because CSEA is the one taking it up. And sometimes they are really on top of it and they file something within like 3 months. Sometimes it takes them a while. It is something that people can call the Office of Child Support Enforcement, talk to their caseworker, and like just kind of keep putting it on their radar and hoping that they do something. I know in my experience, like Claremont County is especially good with that kind of thing. Otherwise, if you're going to file, it would be considered some sort of post-decree motion if you're in a situation where you've been married and divorced, or if it's in a juvenile court setting, it's just one of their motions that has to do with an order that's already been put in place. And the court will have filing fees related to it. When people cannot afford to pay those filing fees, they can submit an affidavit to have the filing fee waived. In my experience, not enough people do this. The threshold for getting that filing fee waived, like your income threshold, it's pretty high. It's not like you have to make nothing in order to get it. You can file that affidavit along with your motion. They don't collect the filing fee at first. They just let the motion get filed, and eventually the court will listen to your argument about why you can't afford to pay that filing fee, which generally is around $100, $150, something like that.
One of the questions I get from clients a lot, though, is there's this assumption that paying child support gives you access to your children, and that's just not the case, correct?
Right. Yeah. I've heard that before too. I pay support. Why can't I see my kid? You're not paying for, your FaceTime with that child. You're paying for that child to just have the necessities of life otherwise, like a toothbrush and school clothes and stuff like that.
Right.
That's our topic. The topic is what is fair for parents versus what is best for children, the cost of fairness. And that's a prime example of a situation where somebody might complain that this isn't fair. There's other situations that come up where people would say it isn't fair. Michelle, you had an example of a situation that you wanted to share where someone had so much child support that they had to pay that it really got in the way of their regular day-to-day life. And can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I mean, this was in another state, wasn't in Ohio, so I don't remember the particulars about how it was calculated, but this person, had spent the child's early years being their primary caregiver. And so when the relationship split, she had to get, a job after not working for years, so lower wage job. The child was kept from her for like 6 months, right? And so when it finally made it to court, they were like, well, you have to pay child support. And so somehow, even though that ex made quite a bit of money and supported the entire family, and this person is just making minimum wage, they had to get like 1 full-time job and 2 part-time jobs in order to pay the child support so that the court would entertain parenting time. And it was insane watching, her scrape just to pay living expenses. I have immense respect for this person. They never griped or complained about it. they were happy to pay what the child needed to make sure the child had what they needed.
Interesting. Can you say that again?
They were happy to pay what the child needed to make sure the child got what they needed.
That is interesting. It's not common to hear that someone sees the child support as actual child support. Often it gets mischaracterized and twisted into something else. And we hear things like, I'm not going to pay to get her nails done, or I want to know where my every dollar is going because I want to make sure that what I'm paying is actually going towards the kids. Griping and complaining about the child support that someone has to pay. So to hear that someone willingly was like, yes, I can't wait to take care of my kids, and this is what's right for the kids. I'm glad that you brought that up, and that we have examples of people like that. That's good.
A lot of times when I encounter someone who says something like, I want to know where my child support is going, those are the people who were not the ones who were in charge of buying the kid new clothes, making sure they had school supplies. They didn't actually make those purchases, so they don't really understand how expensive those things are. When people are complaining about paying $200 a month in child support, but like how much is actually cost to feed and clothe that child throughout the year, it's a lot more than what that's adding up to. And it's not even just that, it's that the parent has to keep a roof over the kid's head and pay the electric bill, keep the lights on, or pay the internet because you have to have internet for all your school assignments now. Just things like that. It actually goes into, there's a lot that goes into raising a child, and that's what that child support is based on. What percent of your overall household expenses are also related to child rearing expenses?
Go back, because we talked about like the fairness of the parents versus what we're talking about, what children deserve or need. When we talked about paying child support in order to get access to your kids, right? Like the arguments around that are, it's not fair that I have to give up this much of my income when I fought so hard just because the other person doesn't work as much or make as much money as me. Or it's not fair that they get time with their child that they don't care enough to even pay child support for, right? And if we stop and we shift the perspective to what do the kids deserve? The kids deserve to have access to their parents. The kids deserve to have economic advantages in both homes where there's not a rich house and a poor house that support their attachment with both parents. And unfortunately, their economic advantages do and are a factor on the attachment they have to a parent. I usually like to bring up celebrity divorces. Every once in a while, you see it reported how much somebody's paying in child support to another celebrity. And, people are laughing at like, they have enough money. And I think it's a really good example of it's here to make sure the economic advantages aren't different from one home to the next.
We were talking earlier about the way parenting time factors into maybe having a lower child support amount. There actually have been some studies on the impact of these economic incentives to have more parenting time. And it's kind of interesting that I think that there's maybe this thought that some people are requesting more parenting time just so that they can have lower child support, and they don't really care about the parenting time. They just want lower child support. The actuality of it is like more often than not, those kids are actually having that parenting time with the other parent. So those economic incentives are really leading to the kid having more time with both parents. And sometimes that can be a good thing. Sometimes it can be a bad thing. Depends, I guess, on the people. But they have been able to correlate with respect to fathers getting this increase in parenting time that's tied to these economic incentives. They've been able to see a correlation with there being less domestic violence incidents overall, and also less paternal suicide. So it does have some positive impacts in these ways. The other side of that, there are more incidents of school-age kids having worse attitudes toward being in school. when there are these economic incentives that are tied to having this extra parenting time with the other parent, the kids are less engaged in school. They have less educational attainment, less completion of their high school or going on to college. And these numbers are higher for girls than for boys.
When the incentive is used for more parenting time.
When you have more parenting time that's linked to this getting a decrease in child support, here's some impacts on the kids that they've studied. They've been able to show that one of the ways they're thinking of this is sometimes when they're in a family where the fathers are going to benefit from an economic incentive, like getting a decrease in child support for having more parenting time. Those also tend to be families where they were a little bit more financially stable during the relationship, and the mothers tended to spend less time working and more time taking care of the children. And now that they're in two separate households, so now mom already has to be working to be able to cover her household expenses in general, but also now dad's getting an incentive to have the kids more, so he's paying less in that child support. Moms are having to go back to work even more. So like the client you were talking about, Michelle, spending more time at work. Dads are still at work the same amount of time they always have been. And now moms are at work even more. And so the fact is kids are spending less time with a parent in general because there's more parents at work. And it's impacting what they're doing at school. And it also has been shown to correlate with worse health outcomes, especially for younger children.
Which that's fascinating. So it's a better situation, we'll just say, for fathers, because we're talking really about the wage earner, the primary wage earner, right? So it's a benefit to the parent that's the wage earner, the father, right? And it's a detriment to the children. And so this is a great example of what we're talking about, fairness of the parents versus what children need.
There's also some positive impact that can be for the kids. One, they're seeing dad more. They actually are having that parenting time. And dad is apparently a little happier because they've noticed there's lower DV incidents. So there are some positives there as well.
Yeah.
But
I don't know. It feels
it's tough to weigh, which is better or worse, because if the kids are maybe not as engaged in school and not attaining as much in the education realm, but then also not getting the health care that they need, maybe that weighs a little heavier.
Yeah, we're getting into another topic that goes into like systemic issues, but in the outset of it, they're just in the a brief summary of it, it feels cringy to say when dads are forced into more parenting time because there's a financial incentive, then their time with their kids may negatively impact them, but it keeps them from beating up people or unaliving themselves.
Yeah.
I think that there should be a better marker that we could rely on for that. Also, if they're prone to DV, why are the kids there?
This is a big question. You mentioned systemic issues. Is child support a gendered issue? And if so, why?
Yes, I know of somebody. I know of two women that were married, and when they split with a child, the court decided that the child support from the primary wage earner could be lowered because the way that child support was set up was based on men being the primary wage earner, and men make more than women. And so the woman was a primary wage earner. They could have her pay less, which fascinates me because everybody in that courtroom has at least a master's degree, and that's not how maths.
That's just ridiculous too, because the numbers are what they are. If this is what this person is earning, that's what they're earning. It doesn't matter what their gender is. That's literally what they're earning. The number is on the W-2. It's on the pay stub. Yeah. That's what they earn. So
yeah.
We've heard a lot about people that can work together, maybe possibly, or people that genuinely do want what's best for their kids, or they do want their parenting time. It's not about the money. But what about the people that we're in a high conflict situation and it's not about what's best for the kids, it's about the money. And one person is in a state of uncertainty always. Is the money going to come? Is it going to be late? Will it be the full amount? Like when it isn't something that is automatically taken out and they definitely get it every month or every week or whenever that gets paid, it's something that winds up being a source of stress for one of the partners. And usually that's the person who would be the target of abuse. You know, if this is a survivor of abuse, we're now engaged in post-separation abuse. Mm-hmm. And the child support is a factor in that post-separation abuse. What kind of advice or what kind of information can we offer to someone who's in that situation where they're dealing with someone who's highly manipulative, somebody that is really trying to work the system, navigate the system in their best interest, and not really thinking about the best interest of the child?
I feel like I should say this really quickly first, just to get it out, right? And I'm going to say it very strongly because it needs to be said strongly. If your child knows your child support arrangements, that's a parent fail.
So in other words, in a situation like this, the children might be aware of what is going on between the parents because at least one of the parents, most likely the high conflict parent, but sometimes, you know, the other person winds up in a defensive posture that they feel like they have to explain to the kids now because the other person, you know, let the cat out of the bag. And how do you handle it when one parent is disclosing that kind of information and the other parent recognizes that that's not a good thing to disclose? It's being weaponized by a parent. It's the one parent saying, okay, here's an example. A woman is divorced. Ex-husband is definitely narcissistic, real jerk of a person, and does not pay child support, has not paid child support in a long time. He drops the child off and notices that mom is wearing a new pair of shoes, running shoes. Mm-hmm. And because that's what she does for her self-care, she goes running. Child gets in the car. Dad says to the kid, well, I see what your mom's spending my child support on. She bought herself a new pair of shoes. The truth is that her friends bought her those shoes. They saw how ragged her running shoes were. They went in together. They bought her the shoes. He's not even paying child support, and he's making those kinds of comments to the kids. And you know, it does become part of the child's life then when one parent is weaponizing the situation. And I think as I sat down to record this with you two today, and being someone that works with the population that I work with, this is the kind of scenario that I'm envisioning when it comes to the cost of fairness, what's fair for parents versus what's best for kids, is this high conflict situation with one person who doesn't give a shit about what's best for the kids and is only there to control, to mischaracterize, to control the narrative, and to continue to be coercively controlling in a post-separation abuse scenario. I'd love for both of you to comment on that kind of a situation.
I've definitely encountered this a lot over the years, and it is so difficult. Just as an attorney, seeing my clients go through this happens a lot when you have a narcissistic parent who is self-employed. That's the worst situation you're going to be in.
That was the situation.
And
as a matter of fact.
So often I see where these families still have shared parenting. They have joint custody. And I think that is a failure in our judicial system. Absolute failure. No one took the time to really understand the dynamics, to really understand the parents and who they are, their personality types, and how that can impact child development. No one took the time to really understand that and make a parenting plan and a decision that was actually going to be in the best interest of those the child or those children. No one did that. It's an absolute judicial failure when you see that happen.
The way that you handle it, unfortunately, it's not like the default, right? We want to defend. When a child says, hey, the other parent said, you're not paying child support, and that's why I can't get nicer clothes or better shoes because you're getting shoes, or you're getting shoes and spending my child support money on that. The thing is, it's an adult issue. And in order to help our children through that situation, we have to have the most pristine boundaries because the other parent's not going to. And having pristine boundaries is making it about the child. What does the child need right now? The child doesn't need an explanation. The child doesn't need to support you. The child needs to be relieved of being concerned about adult situations. The child probably needs coached, teached, and taught and trained, whatever, because that's our job as a parent on what is most important. And so, yeah, this year for Christmas, we're going to make each other gifts. If the other parent says stuff, you know what? That must have been really hard for you to hear. Those are adult situations. So I'm not going to answer your question, but can I help you cope with that? Or do you have some thoughts or feelings surrounding having had that conversation? You know, like, and so you switch from the content, don't answer the child's question, to the process. What's best for the child? What does the child need right now from me as a parent?
I'm glad that you actually answered that question because I was just on my rant.
No, I loved your rant though.
I just see it so much though, and I just feel so bad for my clients. And I have clients that come in and they're in these situations, and it's like, I got to tell you, yeah, you're in a really tough spot, and that sucks. Yeah.
Children are going to want to be around the parent with the crappy boundaries because they get to do and whatever, right? They're also going to feel emotionally pressured, exhausted, right? And recognize at some point that they're not allowed to have their own thoughts or opinions or feelings around that parent.
Yeah.
Right. And so the parent that provides the nurturance with the structure, you're going to be the one that fields their wildest emotions, and not just going to, you get to. You're going to be the one that they feel safe with. You're going to be the one they'll eventually choose to be around because you aren't burdening them with information where they feel pressured to act one way or another. It takes a while though, because I think at first, especially when one parent is pressuring, they're looking for the other parent to give them cues as to how to react or behave. And until they figure out that you're not going to give them cues and they get to be whoever they want, it's an adjustment.
Well, I just want to thank you both again for spending the time with me to talk about these topics. It's something that is really hitting home for members of our audience, whether they're watching or listening, that they're in situations where they feel powerless. They don't have the knowledge. They don't have the money to, get the expert to answer the questions or to fight for them. And they feel lost and hopeless in their situation. So having something like this where people can hear what the experts have to say is really, really valuable. So I just want to thank you for your input and your time in creating these videos with me. And again, we were talking about the cost of fairness as it relates to child support and what is fair for parents versus what is best for children. And thank you for watching or listening. Goodbye.